We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was produced, the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present.
Hi, Ant here. I'm taking a short break, but I'll be back with more interviews from January the 22nd. Military and army personnel are regularly pushed to the limits of the human body and mind. From my time in the military, I know firsthand what toll this can take on your physical and mental health. In this special episode, I'm revisiting some of these powerful conversations I've had in the last year. Today, you'll hear from Elle Walton, Damien Tomlinson and Brian Udell, who have each had to endure hardships and learned lessons as a result. First up, my brother in the DS, Elle Walton. Ollie spoke to me about his military career and the moment he realised that the war he was fighting was within himself.
I just think a big problem with me, I don't know if anything external would have satisfied what I needed to solve inside. Yeah. You know, and I needed to learn that the hard way. I finally left after 6 years, said I was never going back to a war zone. 3 months later, I'm in a war zone as a contractor.
So you leave, so you never go back to a war zone.
Yeah.
And then someone comes along and back in that day though, when the Iraqs did kick off as a private contractor. It was you were earning some ridiculous amounts of money. Right? It's about the money. It wasn't really about going into and having job satisfaction. It's like I've got the SF stamp. I'm going to use it now as a private contractor. You're getting paid ridiculous amounts of money. You're going from your 50 quid a day to your 500 quid a day, whatever it was. You know, and all of a sudden you're living. You know, you're going out there. You're just going through the process, but you're living like a pop star, right?
Yeah, 100%. Which was a blessing and a curse.
Okay, now talk me through that blessing and the curse.
Yeah, well, for me, it was like I got out there, exactly. I now call it fool's gold because I would never compromise my mental and physical state to do any job. You know what I mean? We are the most important project there is, that is fact. So for me out there, you're obviously compromising everything, the safety and everything. Well, I don't talk about safety because health and safety wasn't something that was a part of our life anyway. But the thing is, you're out there doing jobs that you would never do in the military. You know what I mean? And you're risking things like, you know, I've got 12 people. There's 2 of us looking after 12 people on a convoy.
You've got no top cover as well.
No top cover, no nothing. So you know that if you get whacked, when you get whacked, it's probably highly likely you're not coming out.
Yeah.
So that's happening on a far too regular basis. You know what I mean? And for the first time, I can remember that first attack. I talk about it a lot because I learned a lot about myself in that. You know, 140 kilometres. Driving down the road in a convoy, got whacked by the militia, 2-car attack onto us from behind. And mate, in that moment, it was like, I absolutely shit myself. Not literally.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? When that attack came in, it was like, and I'm driving a car and I'm like realising what's going on.
You've got no Apache cover, you got no air assets, you got a weapon, a couple of mags, 2 of you against a whole army, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Who don't give a fuck.
Who don't, and you've got no, there's no fire and manoeuvre out there. And
no safety cover, no nothing. And then you realise in that moment that how, you know, back in the day when that happened, when you're in SF, you would like, bring it on.
Yeah, exactly.
Bring it on. You're invincible.
You're
invincible. You've got a team around you so highly trained. You know what I mean? Everyone's the best weapon system in the world. You know what I mean? Yeah. And you just want that to happen. You're gagging for it to happen. But in that moment, I shit myself and I started thinking, this, you know, I've analysed this time and time again about what happened in that moment because it was almost like I'd stopped breathing for a minute. You know what I mean? And that's what happens when we get into stressful situations. You start to shallow breathe.
Yeah, of course.
And then once you start to do that, cortisol starts to increase, chemical reaction, which is the fight or flight or freeze. Mm-hmm. I'm driving a car. It's not the best thing to happen. You know what I mean? I start thinking about all the things that could go wrong. So you then start to build into that fear. Fear is a mental and emotional rehearsal for something you don't want to happen. You know what I mean? You can't allow it to dominate. It's contagious, isn't it? It doesn't mean turn your back on it. But you can't. And in that moment, it wasn't until they started shooting at us. Bang, bang, you know, the intimidating sound of that orchestra of hell, of all those AK-47s going off, that it snapped me out. And it was like, bang. Nothing more everything was subconscious from that moment, and the training kicked back in, thank God. And I took a breath in that moment, almost like I'd not breathed for the last minute and a half or whatever. And in that moment, breathing, just adding clarity, which drop the cortisol, give me a mindset of clarity and not confusion. What do I need to focus on? Not the people in front, not all the things that could go wrong, the people that are shooting at me. Nothing else matters apart from that.
Yeah.
And in that moment, that's why I learned so much. I talk about that: breathe, recalibrate, deliver the action.
That which gives you that clarity of mind to decision making.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and as you know, and I talked about that a lot with people afterwards, and it was like, that's the one thing that got me out of that situation. We got back, and it was incredible. Although in that, I learned so much from that. Much from that, and that's the fact that and you can adapt that in every situation, because you get to a stressful situation, whether you're asking for a pay rise or whatever you're doing, or any situation that is uncomfortable. Unless you get control of your faculties, you're going to make a decision in a heightened sense of emotion, which is then going to create a negative situation that, you're pushing yourself. Your mind just goes, get me out, whatever, wherever you want to take me, get me out.
First thing that pops up, you action it, and it's desperate. And
it's desperate, and it's in the wrong direction. And that's obviously quite an extreme, but people could, there's a lot of stuff now out there about breath work, which is so powerful, starting to control your breathing and everything else, which is incredible. So, but that moment taught me so much about that situation, about myself. But the thing is, the negative side is that was the fact that I thought, that was early on in the days of getting there as a contractor. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And then from that moment on, I was like, I ain't coming back from here. But I'd kind of given up by that time anyway. I was drinking too much, a lot. We went back to the villas. I was drinking. Everyone was drinking. When the tools went down, everyone was drinking. But I think I was drinking more. I was like, I made sure in my room that I had a stash, so I knocked myself out. You know what I mean? I used to sleep with a pistol under my pillow, not knowing if the door was going to be bashed in by the militia. And I lived like that for 4 years. Started taking Valium the day after, just to handle the anxiety of the hangovers and of course. Living in Baghdad in the red zone. And it was horrible, mate. It was absolutely horrible. I look back now, and that really did cave me in mentally. I had to get out of there. 4 years later, I just said, I plucked up the courage to leave. And it's so hard when you're being paid that much money, you know what I mean? And that's why I call it fool's gold now. Yeah. Because we're quite happy to compromise everything for the dollar.
In 2009, Commando Damon Tomlinson was serving in Afghanistan when one night changed everything. He was working a night patrol when his unit drove over a Taliban IED. Damien lost both of his legs in the explosion and was left fighting for his life. He was determined to reclaim his life on his own terms, and he spoke to me about the mindset that enabled him to do so.
I'm making progress if it hurts. You know what I mean? And then you've got doctors who are just used to dealing with punters who go in with a sore knee or whatever. And then I'm like, I don't really care what you guys have got to do. I'm going to be doing this. You're either going to be someone who's on the journey with me to do this, or I'm going to find someone who is. You know what I mean? And so I never really looked at a lot of because to me, I was still me. I knew, but I definitely knew that everyone on that night saw something they were never going to unsee. And apparently the time where every now and then, because they had moved to white light to save me, they'd done everything they could, tourniquets and stuff like that. But the village, because you can hear what they're saying on their icon radios, there was a huge conference. There was way more of them than we originally thought, but we're basically saying, let's light them up. So everyone's posturing, getting ready. If one shot got fired, the US chopper wouldn't have got me out and I'd be dead. But at the minute the troops in contact would have happened, that rings through. I'm a flag on my parents' mantelpiece.
And what did you manage to keep then? What did you lose and what did you manage to keep? Because it was looking pretty grim at one moment that you're going to lose your arms.
Yeah. So when my parents found out, the word was he's really low single-digit percentage chance of living, and if he does, it's going to be a triple amputee. And at that stage, I was at Camp Bastion, which is the UK base, with the trauma team under a space blanket, and if I couldn't hold my body heat, I was gone. So that was when they found out, and I mean, it's so disjointed when you get back. But to me, I woke up and I was still me.
You seem to have tackled it with a super positive mindset. Do you think if you hadn't Do you think there's any grey areas here, or do you think you stoop to the lowest of the lows where you don't want to be here anymore? And did that mindset ever take charge?
I got to dark places through it. Yeah, I definitely did, but not in the initial phases. For me, were like, I remember having this convo with my dad because he's always said, "You've never used your brain." It's just disappointing. He walked in with this great big grin on his face. I'm like smiling at him, we're having a laugh, like in a hospital, and he goes, "Well, you got to use your brain now, don't you?"
Good old dad.
You got me, Stevie. Hey, yeah, I'm gonna now. And then, you're sort of mapping out. All right, we've got to change. We've got to do different things. But to me, the most important thing was there's a group of guys who have gone through something that I can't imagine seeing, let alone it being something you care about. And they've somehow kept me alive. So the mess that I could see, I saw as the result of people's effort on the ground, which I still see it as that. It's what it is. So I've got to try and do something that then has them know how good of a job they've done. So to me, I then had a finite timeline of when they were flying home, and I had to be up, walking, standing in a pair of jeans so you couldn't see prosthetic legs. And it didn't matter what it took. And then, there were bits where, it hurts a lot.
That was your goal. That was your next objective. That was your next mission,
That
right?
was it.
Which, again, we talk about purpose. It's and you've done everything that you can to make sure that you've done that.
Yeah. And I mean, I was by all accounts, I was probably one of the worst patients in the history of North Shore Private Hospital because I was just uncompromising with it. If I didn't think, and right or wrong, didn't think that someone was aligned with my goals, I would remove them from the process or ignore their advice. I'd just go, all right, I've been through enough to know where I'm going with this. I know my limits. You don't. There's a picture of me 5 weeks after on a prosthetic that you're not really supposed to weight bear through. But I was like, I'm going down the hall on this because so I'm on one of those walkers pushing it along with the thing, and there's just concerned faces all
Dragging
around
his
me.
prosthetic leg along.
Yeah, well, and I'm just like, no, well, okay, cool. Well, this is what we've got to do. This arm's still plated at the time. There's a lot of stuff going wrong with it, but I was like, I'm not going to heal laying down. And they're like, you got to rest. You got to rest. And I'm like, everyone tells me to rest. Go home, you rest. Get it up. I got stuff to do.
My final guest today is Captain Brian Udell. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, Brian was fighting for his life. He just survived the highest speed ejection from a US fighter aircraft at nearly 1,300 kilometers per hour. Just as he started to think, I'm going to die out here tonight, his resilient mindset took over.
My grandmother was an incredibly strong woman, and she always taught me that we don't get to choose the day we're going to have. We get to choose how we're going to deal with it. And we should be prepared for whatever the day brings, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And she says, if you're in a situation that you have no control over and you need help, you pray for what you need, not for what you want. And so I put my head down on the raft and I say, God, I can't die tonight. I've got too much to do. My wife was 4 months pregnant with our first child. And I thought to myself how selfish of it would be for me to not be there and for her to get that knock on the door. I did not want her to get that knock on the door.
Your wife was 4 months pregnant at this time.
Exactly.
Did that thought process went through your head just as I suppose you're going to give up? It's like, I can't give up. I've got to stay alive. My wife is pregnant. I've got a child on the way. And was it that thought that ultimately switched things up?
It'll give you superhuman strength.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I took that raft and I shoved it down into the base between my legs like this. I threw my shoulder into it like that, and I rode the wave up. And when I crested the top of the wave and went down the backside, my body flipped right into the raft, and I was sitting there perfectly. And my leg from the knee down was hanging 90 to the right over the side. My foot was turned around backwards and folded up underneath me. And this arm was bent back like that. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, you can't live out here looking like this. You're going to be out here a long time. You can't sit here and be looking at yourself like this. So you got to straighten yourself out. This is one of those times where it's better to look good than to feel good. And so I grabbed my leg and I heaved it in, and it went from 90 right to 90 left. It's now resting across the top of my other leg, and I'm thinking, oh crap, that doesn't look right either. So I shoved it down into the base of the raft. I pulled my foot out from underneath me, got it pointed in the right direction, brought my arm around and immobilized it into my harness. And now I know I didn't structurally fix anything, but if I'm going to be out here, I want everything pointed in the right direction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So now I'm starting to go into shock. I'm shaking uncontrollably. I know that if I don't stop and treat myself for the shock, that I'm going to go unconscious. And at that point, I reached down to my G-suit pocket. We have these pockets on the legs, and I opened the zipper where I always kept a water bottle. I stuck my hand down into that pocket to retrieve that water bottle, and the water bottle had been blown right through the bottom of the pocket and was gone. Well, I always kept my wallet in the other pocket. I wanted to see if it was there. I opened the zipper and stuck my hand down in there, and my wallet was also blown through the bottom of the pocket, and it was gone. And then I started thinking, crap, I got to cancel credit cards. I got to go get a new driver's license.
Brian, please tell me that didn't go through your head.
That is exactly what went through my head. I'm thinking somebody is good. That wallet's going to wash up and somebody is going to get $20. And that was a lot of money back in the day.
But Brian, do you think that way of thinking just distracts the mind from the bigger issues? You know, it keeps you alive ultimately, doesn't it? Because, you know, you're just trying to keep the mind active. You're trying not to, like you said, go into shock. So I suppose all these little things that you're thinking about are a positive distraction from not actually looking at the bigger problem, which is you can't move. You're now floating in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with one arm ultimately, and you're probably not going to make it out of there.
I have had the privilege of meeting and speaking to numerous Vietnam POWs and people that have gone through just incredibly insane things. And there's one common denominator that I have found in all of those people. The events are different. There's a lot of similarity between the events, but the one common denominator I have found is a sense of humor.
Humor in the face of adversity.
That's exactly right.
That's a
You
Royal
have to be
Marine
able
motto.
to find humor in the darkest places. If you can laugh at yourself in the situation that you're in, that's half the battle right there.
Do you know what, Brian?
Okay.
I was hoping you was going to say that, because that's one of the Royal Marine core values is humor in the face of adversity. And it's so true. It works.
Yeah. Live it, love it, laugh it, man. Just freaking deal with what you got in front of you and trudge on through. And things can always get worse. I mean, you know, I picture where I'm at in the situation that I'm at, but you know what? I'm still alive. I'm still breathing in and out. And the other thing that I tell people, I said, is we all set these goals, right? Well, every goal has a set of sub goals. You go trying to attack this goal, it's overwhelming. But you attack each sub goal, and each sub goal that's successful gives you confidence to keep going. And that's what that night was all about. It was a series
tiny
of
victories.
Little victories, exactly, that then leads to the ultimate of surviving the situation.
If you'd like to hear the full interviews with Ollie Ollerton, Damien Tomlinson and Brian Udell, I'll link them in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Head Game. I'll be back January the 22nd with more powerful stories like the ones you've heard today. Until then, I'm Matt Middleton. Catch you again next time.